each day is better than the one before, is the fact of the matter. You know, we vaccinated millions of children. I don't think we actually know the number, but we've vaccinated millions of children. And I'd say that's wrong to say we. We are partners in an activity which has vaccinated millions of children. And there's a huge segment of those millions of children who are not going to get sick and die from things that their predecessors got sick and died from. So, and you know, each day is a little better than the one before.
And each day, a couple thousand or perhaps tens of thousands of kids are getting vaccinated, which is just, we live in a world, even it strikes me, having filled a lot of passports, that we can get so caught up in our own lives and, oh my gosh, bus fare went up by 25 cents, or oh my gosh, the price of my latte is, you know, I had to wait too long in line. And you kind of get out there and you realize the problems that are facing the world and just how inconsequential our problems are in comparison. I'm curious, how much time are you able to get out to the furthest reaches of the Foundation's work?
Well, it's about once a year I make a major trip, but that's minuscule actually in terms of the travel that is happening at our foundation. The global health people, well, we have three departments: global health, global development, and United States. And those first two consume somewhere in the neighborhood of 80%, I think, of our grant making. And those people are in in strange places all the time. I'm sure that we're a major boon to the airline business in the world. But we know you have to be there, and you know we have employees in India, and now it won't be long we'll have some permanent representation in Africa. It just needs to happen in order to get things done.
You trained as a lawyer, you practiced as a lawyer for 48 years, and you're very well spoken. Have you ever been somewhere witnessing the Foundation's work that left you speechless?
That left me
speechless.
I wonder if I've ever been speechless. Whatever the positive emotion is, without perhaps reaching speechlessness, every year I make a trip to Cambridge University in England, and I visit with 250 graduate students at Cambridge University who are there on our ticket. Oh, I may be speechless. It is awesome. You would love to see it. I bet you 20, 23, 26-year-old young people who've had a magnificent college education, been through a competitive selection process. You know, you don't have to think very long to have a very clear view of what I'm talking about with those 250 kids, and they're from everywhere, and you know, and that's part of the attraction of it. And by and large, they're going to go back to those places where they've come from and be significant influences. So that's a week I cherish greatly. That isn't the only thing of its kind in my life, but that's up at the top.
Great. You're listening to the Commonwealth Club of California radio program. We're talking with Bill Gates Sr., the father of Bill Gates, who's talking about his book, Showing Up for Life, Thoughts on the Gifts of a Lifetime. I'm John Wood, the founder and chairman of Room to Read. We have 15 minutes left. Are you ready for the lightning round? Question from the audience. In this era of the worst economic meltdown, which is so pronounced that commentators can't even figure out a name to give it, what do you think of the 5% rule for foundation giving? And is this a time to look at changing that?
Well, that's wonderful. I'll take a second and explain that. I mean, that may be unnecessary, and I hope I'm not wasting your time. But universities and others who have long-term foundations have this approach to spending, which is that you don't spend so much that you lose the purchasing power of the asset. So some careful studies have been done, and it sort of comes out that if you spend 5% of the principal every year, and some would argue 4.5%, that over 100 years you will retain the purchasing power of your assets. It's very, very logical, sensible thing. But at the University of Washington, where I am involved, we had a couple of $2 billion. And this economic thing came along. And because you averaged your last 3 years to figure what the principal is and then apply the 5% to that, in a downturn, you're including a couple of years back there where you had a lot more money than you do in the third year. As a result of which, 5% becomes 6.5 or 7 or something of that kind. So you're making a significant inroad on principal, which has already been threatened by, well, more than threatened, been diminished by economic events. And it's almost impossible to say to yourself, well, but 100 years from now, it'll be all right. We'll just keep spending 5% because it'll go back up. Nobody can do that, at least nobody I know can do. So at the University of Washington, we changed. We said, we're going to reduce our payout by 25% next year, just arbitrarily, and the same the year after that, in order to make some effort to retain the corpus at a level where, as things turn around, it'd be large enough so it'll grow back up. So, and I think that's not an uncommon experience. I think I answered the question. I hope so.
Yeah, I'll ask a follow-up. What do you think of a philanthropist like, let's say, Chuck Feeney at General Atlantic, who basically decided to just spend it down over 20 years while he's still alive and literally spend it down to zero because he feels like this way the money can, A, be used because a problem solved early is cheaper than a problem solved late, but also he's worried about, well, what if these random people that inherit my board screw it up and don't stick with my vision. What do you think of that kind of radical approach?
Well, that's interesting because this is one of the few things about which my son and I are not in agreement. I'm a fan of the Perpetual Foundation. I look at examples like Rockefeller and some of that quality and the things that they've accomplished, and the notion of that entity being active and doing thoughtful, imaginative, positive things over, as far out as you can see and beyond, makes sense to me. But to a lot of people, including my son, the notion of something like that going on forever, you don't know who's going to be involved, what they're going to do. I mean, it just seems we don't need to do that. This should come to some end. So their decision was that the foundation would close out 50 years after the last of them passes on. So, and this is a discussion that goes on in philanthropic circles, hot and heavy all the time.
Yeah.
And there's a very wide divergence of views about it. I might say that one thing I would certainly love to be is around working at the foundation in that last 4 or 5 years when you're and that's a picnic.
Yeah. I plan to be running a taco wagon right outside the headquarters. Hello, good to see you again. A couple questions from the audience have to do with education, and I'm kind of trying to synthesize about 8 questions down into one coherent question. And go back to your book. In your book, you said that the United States is known for having one of the best higher education systems in the world, yet we cannot make that claim when it comes to K through 12. And you think a lot of this comes down to competition. Can you talk about your views on the importance of competition in education?
Sure, let's see if I can make this reasonably brief. It's kind of a long possibility here. I'll keep it brief. To start with, it is a not widely recognized characteristic of our